Hello and welcome to this session on SFX Systems Administration. My name is Carrie Bartels and I'm a trainer in Ex Libris North America. In this session, first we'll take a look at the SFX server and see how it's structured. Then we'll take a look at how backup and recovery works in SFX. And then we'll also take a look at security and how it's handled. We'll also cover how to access and use the log files for testing and debugging, as well as how to use the debug tool in SFX Admin Center. We'll take a close look after that at the server admin utility and each of its options. And we'll also talk about KB, or in other words, knowledge base updates and how that process works. And then lastly, we'll just go over some standard recommended maintenance for SFX. Keep in mind that we'll just be going over basic systems administration information. All of this information that I'll be giving you in the session is also covered in the Systems Administration Guide. There may be times when I'll cover a topic here in this session and you'll be thinking, okay, but how do I actually do that? The Systems Administration Guide has step-by-step instructions on how to perform these tasks. So in this session, we'll be focusing on more or less the what and the why rather than the how-to in this session. And just rest assured that all of the how-tos are documented and available in the Systems Administration Guide when you need them. By the end of this session, you'll have an understanding for how SFX is structured, how backup and recovery works, how to use the log files for troubleshooting and debugging, and how to use the debug tool that's available in the SFX Admin Center, how to use the server admin utility that's available on the server, and what you need to do to keep SFX happy and healthy and up to date with knowledge base updates and recommended maintenance tasks. So let's first talk about the SFX environment and how it's structured. 3 instances are provided with a basic installation of SFX. Now, in particular, for those who host SFX locally, there are instructions in the System Administration Guide for how to change the names of the instances or create additional ones. And keep in mind that you'll need additional license keys for any additional instances, so you'll need to request them from Ex Libris if you don't have them already. In general, the global instance, what you see here, and it's typically abbreviated as you see here, is where everything is updated when you run SFX or knowledge base updates. The test instance, again, you'll see the abbreviation that's typically used here. The test instance is used to create your own test area. And then the local instance, what you see here, again, you'll see also the abbreviation. The local instance is where your institution's resources are activated and customized. Now, the local instance also, it stores only the data that is specific to your library, such as activation statuses, whether a target service and object are active or not. And it also contains local data. So, for instance, your local threshold information, any linking parameters, any local parsers that you've created, and so on. All of the files for SFX exist in the global instance, and they're what we call symbolically linked to the local instance. So the local instance uses the symbolic links to refer back to the files in the global instance. Now, when editing files in an instance other than the global instance, so if you're editing a file in your local instance, for example, know that most of the files are really just links to files in the global instance. And we recommend that you use the VI editor in Unix as your text editor because it will display a warning when you're about to edit a file that's actually a link. When you're editing one of the files using VI editor, and you'll see it actually here in this screenshot, you'll get this message asking whether you want to break the symbolic link, yes or no. If you decide to break the symbolic link, VI Editor creates a copy of the file in your local instance, and you can edit the file there in your local instance as you wish. So for example, if you want to do customizations, such as change the colors and fonts in your SFX instance, it is actually necessary to break the symbolic link so that you'll have that file in your local instance and you can edit it as you need to. Now, if you answer no to the question of whether you want to break the symbolic link or not, VI will open the file in the global instance in a read-only mode. And we recommend that you don't make any local changes to files that are in the global instance because the files there may actually be updated without warning during SFX updates, and you want to make sure not to lose your changes. If you break the symbolic link and then decide later on that you would like to reconnect it to the global instance, that's definitely possible. And the instructions are in the Systems Administration Guide. So with that in mind, let's look at the SFX structure. The installation level that you see here just represents the complete SFX application. And you can actually have more than one installation of SFX on a server. So that's why we're seeing here this 4_1. The 4 represents the version of SFX. And at this point, most users, if not all of them, are actually on SFX version 4. The installation is represented by this second number. So the installation for this is actually in slot 1 on the server. There may be another different installation of SFX for another customer in slot 2 on the server, and so on. So that's why you'll see this 4, which represents the SFX version, _1. And that 1 represents, again, the slot that you're on the server. Within each installation, there are instances, and there are basically 2 types of instances. The global instance that you see here, and that has information about objects for all customers and is maintained by Ex Libris. The local instance that you see here on the far right, that has information relevant only to your specific institution. So activation information, whether something is active or not. Local coverage or local thresholds. Specific linking information like your linking parameters. So that's all contained in the local instance. Local information also includes overrides of global data. So for example, if you've decided to override the default, or in other words, the global title for a target with a title of your choice, that would actually be contained in the local instance as well. In a default installation, you actually have 2 local instances. So not only this one, and this actually represents your production version, but your test instance that you see here in the middle, that's actually considered a local instance as well, because it will have local data in it as you're doing testing. The institute is a localized subdivision of a local instance. And institutes have their own configuration settings that can be different from the instance defaults. Institutes are typically used with or in consortium or a consortia who's using SFX. So here we're seeing the file structure. Besides the global and the local instances, there are 3 other directories in the SFX installation. So here we have, using the abbreviation, the global instance, the local instance, and the test instance. And keep in mind, the local instance, this is typically your production environment. The local instance and your test instance are actually considered both local instances because they all both have local data in them. So besides these instances that you see here, you'll see 3 other directories on the far left-hand side. The app directory contains all supporting software required to run SFX. So, for example, MySQL, Perl, Python, Java, Apache Web Servers, and so on. The data directory contains MySQL databases. And then the proxy directory contains reverse proxy Apache files. Now, within each instance that you see here, we have a set of directories also. And notice that the directories are the same for each instance. And so I'll just take you through what each of these directories within the instances do. For the admin directory, this contains command line tools. So to give you an example, if you use the data loader tool or the export tool in SFX Admin Center, those tools can also be run on the server using command line. So this is the directory you would use, the admin directory, for any command line tools. Archive contains statistics archived files. CGI Core contains SFX Core CGI programs, and these are not editable. CGI Public, however, contains CGI programs that are required for certain targets, and these are editable. Config, as you may know, will contain all configuration files for SFX. The databases directory, that contains SQL table definitions and a scratch directory. Export, as you see here, that contains export files from KB Tools. So if you are using in the SFX Admin Center the export tool, you'll have an export file that's generated for you. You can also find that file here in the export directory on the server. The home directory is just the home directory of the instance. lib, the lib directory, that contains Perl modules, target parsers, source parsers, and target displayer programs. So any types of parsing programs, for instance, all of those are contained in the lib directory. Logs contain, as you might imagine, log files, and these are SFX requests logs when redirection is used. So it's used to see requests that are sent to the SFX server. SFX admin contains the programs that are used in the SFX Admin Center. So when you're using SFX Admin Center, all of those programs run behind the scenes actually on the server, and they're contained in the SFX Admin directory. And then we have templates. Templates are HTML, or that's where HTML pages reside for the SFX menu screen, the A to Z lists, and so on. So now that we've covered the server file structure, let's talk about backup and recovery options. The first thing to know about backups is that if you're a direct customer where your SFX instance is hosted on an Ex Libris server, you don't need to perform backups, and that's because Ex Libris will provide this service on your behalf. And if you are a direct customer, note that backups with no downtime will be run for you each day. So you and your user should see no impact in using SFX whenever these backups are happening. If you host SFX locally on your own server, there are two types of backups. A backup with downtime that we recommend running on a weekly basis, and a backup with no downtime that we recommend running on a daily basis. For customers who host SFX locally, let's talk briefly about the backup that requires downtime. So the backup with downtime is a tar archive that includes a backup of the SFX installation, and it includes software files and MySQL databases. This type of backup can be run every day, but because of the required downtime, it actually might be inconvenient for you. So we do actually recommend that it be run on a weekly basis. So let's talk pros and cons. The advantage to running the full backup is that recovery is fast, easy, and very straightforward. The disadvantage is obviously the downtime, and this backup requires shutting down the MySQL and Apache servers. The length of the downtime will actually depend on how long it takes to create the tar file. So to perform this backup that requires downtime, you would log on as the Unix root user and then type this statement. Running the backup with no downtime creates a tar file of the SFX tree that includes the SFX files and a tar archive per instance. And this is actually just a MySQL hot copy dump of the database files. Since there is no downtime with this backup method, it's more convenient to run this daily, but the recovery requires more manual work since it is based on a binary copy of the MySQL databases. Again, for local customers only, there are 3 ways to perform a backup with no downtime. And keep in mind, for our direct customers, Ex Libris runs these backups with no downtime for you. But during a backup with no downtime, there's a hot backup of MySQL data files. You can also decide to back up the software excluding MySQL data files. And you can also create incremental backups of the bin or binary log. And if you're going to be running any backups, please refer to the Systems Administration Guide for more detailed information. In SFX version 4, database information for each local instance is stored in 2 separate database schemas. The global schema that you see here, this contains global or descriptive information such as targets, target services, and portfolio information. So all of that is stored in the global schema. Local information, on the other hand, so activation statuses, your threshold information, your institution-specific linking information, that's stored in the local instance schema. So that would apply to your local instance as well as the test instance. And again, both of these are considered local instances. One copy of the global information exists per SFX installation. And this global information is maintained by Ex Libris as part of the global knowledge base. Any locally created descriptive database items. So for example, if you've created a local target or a target service or a local portfolio or object, for each of the local instances, that any locally created information is stored in the local schema. Now because of this, to recover SFX from a backup, you have two options if you're a local customer. A full restoration, which includes all of the databases in the installation. And a full restoration is going to ensure that the global and the instance databases are all synchronized. And you perform this restoration when a cold backup was used. The other option is to recover from a single instance, and that involves restoring both the instance local database schema and those database records in the global schema that are not owned by the local instance. And you can only perform this recovery if you're using the hot backup method. There are step-by-step instructions on how to perform a database recovery in the System Administration Guide. And again, for our direct customers, keep in mind Ex Libris will be responsible for backups as well as recovery. So let's talk briefly about SFX security at this point. SFX has support for SSL. So it's possible to configure instances so that SFX and the Admin Center are accessible using HTTPS. And you'd want to do this if you wanted to make SFX more secure, or if you wanted to support the Unix file manager in the SFX Admin Center. You can restrict access to the Admin Center based on IP. It's also possible to restrict access to the SFX menus based on IP as well. And there's a session timeout that you can configure for the Admin Center. Right now, that default is that the Admin Center will time out after 4 hours of inactivity, but you can change this session timeout. And then finally, SFX is set up to handle security breaches called XSS, or in other words, cross-site scripting. And this is a type of breach that could be used by harmful HTML tags sent through as an open URL request. So there's validation that's in place to prevent this from happening. If you're concerned with security or have more questions about the options that I've mentioned here, please do refer to the Systems Administration Guide. There is an entire section devoted to security that goes into a lot more detail than what I have here. So let's now turn our attention to testing and debugging. We briefly saw the debug tool in the troubleshooting session, but here it is again, and I'll go into a little bit more detail here. This tool allows you to determine the source of errors that may be occurring in the SFX flow, like, for example, missing targets that are not displaying in the SFX menu, perhaps corrupted target URLs, proxy problems, server errors. That information you may be able to deduce from the debug tool. When the debugging tool is on, notice it's off right now, but when it is on, it's very important to enter your own IP address. So the IP address, for example, of your local machine. So, and this is so your users won't see any debug information. So this is a very important thing to keep in mind. Now, if I'm in my source database and I have debugging turned on, instead of perhaps getting the target displayed or the SFX menu, I'll actually get text, and this is debug code that you see here. And actually, let's go ahead and go to the debug tool in SFX, and let me show you this live. So in troubleshooting, in the SFX Admin Center, I'm going to click on debugging. And here we see two different options. The first option is debugging in the SFX menu. This can be used, for example, if there's a target missing from your SFX menu. So this can help determine that. So any issues with your SFX menu itself, this is the debugging option to use. The second option we have is debugging in the target. So this is where the SFX menu displays, a user clicks on a target link. Perhaps it doesn't take them to the actual article itself. Maybe it takes them to an article cannot be found page, or a page cannot be displayed. So this is the option you would use in that scenario. So let's go ahead and talk through these scenarios. Let me go to the SFX admin, or SFX menu rather, that I have generated here. And first of all, you can find out some really good information just by right-clicking in the SFX menu and clicking on View Source. So that will allow you to see some good information. In particular, we'll see the open URL displayed here. So this is the metadata that SFX is using, and that's contained in this open URL. So that's some good information right off the bat. However, if we turn on debugging, we'll get some more information. So that's what we'll do next. So I'm going to work with the SFX menu first. I'm going to go ahead and turn debugging on. Notice I've limited just to my IP address, and this is the IP address of my local machine. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Submit. And then I get a successfully changed message. I'm going to go back to my SFX menu. I'm going to refresh that menu. And this time I'm going to do the same thing that I did previously by just right-clicking anywhere on the SFX menu screen and clicking on View Source. Notice I see a lot more information here, and this is step-by-step what SFX is doing, each action that SFX is taking. So for example, in line 6, it's parsing and augmenting the request. So it's received the open URL, it's parsing the open URL, and so on. So you'll see a lot of good information here. And sometimes you can just search on the word error, for example, or failed, and that may tell you some good information about what perhaps may have gone awry. Also notice here we see right away the information that was contained in the open URL. It's possible that maybe some of this information is incorrect. Maybe an ISSN is incorrect, and maybe that's what's causing a target from not displaying in the SFX menu. So just a couple of options to think through or to look at for debugging. And I'm going to go ahead and close that up, and let's go back to the debugging tool in SFX Admin Center. And now let's take it from the perspective of I click on a target link in the SFX menu, and perhaps it's not taking me to where I anticipate I'm going to go. So let me show you an example. So from our SFX menu, I'm going to click on MetaPress Baywood Publishing Company on that first target link. And in this case, it actually takes me to the full text of the article. But let's say it actually took me to a screen that said article could not be found. This is where we can do some target debugging. So I'm going to go ahead and close this window up, that tab, and we'll go back to the debugging tool. And we're going to debug in the target area now. So I'm going to click on, and notice again I've restricted debugging to my local machine's IP address so that users will not see any debug code at all when they're using SFX. And I'm going to click on Submit again. Let's go back to the menu. I'm going to refresh the menu screen, and this time I'm going to click on the link again for MetaPress Baywood Publishing Company. Notice instead of getting the full text, I actually get debug code. So this is why it's very important to make sure to restrict it to an IP so that users do not see this debug code. And as I look down here, here's information that's being passed to the target. And actually, if I scroll down to the very bottom of the screen, probably the most useful piece of information will be the target URL. This is where this is the URL that's being used to access the article. So you may take a look at this open URL and maybe notice that information is incorrect in that target URL. So for instance, maybe the volume's incorrect or the start page is incorrect. So that may be why, in this case, MetaPress Baywood Publishing Company, why I might see an article cannot be found page, because MetaPress doesn't quite know how to resolve, it doesn't quite know what the user is looking for based on the information provided to it in the open URL. So just some options for debugging there, some things to think about when you're using the debug tool. In terms of debugging, there is more information in the SFX Advanced User's Guide about the debug tool. Now, in addition to the debug tool, Apache log files can be used to debug requests that are sent to the SFX server. The log files that the Apache servers create are, first of all, error_log. So any error that occurs while sending a request to the server is logged in this file, error_log. There's also access_log, and this is where any access request made to the SFX server is logged. Both files are located at the following paths, and for the reverse proxy Apache server logs, here's the path for that. And for the instance-specific Apache server logs, here's the path to access those logs. And in order to view the content of the files, you must log on to the server as an instance user. So let's now talk about a tool on the server called the Server Admin Utility. With each SFX instance, it has its own admin tool, and that tool again is called the Server Admin Utility. And with this utility, you can perform various tasks, like for instance, systems maintenance, diagnostics, creating indices, and we've talked about a couple of jobs in the past, the A to Z indexing job and the RSI indexing job. And you can also run exports. The full path of the tool is here. So to start the Server Admin Utility, again, you'll need to log on to the SFX server as an instance user. So for example, for your local instance, you may log on as the user SFX LCL41. So that might be an example of an instance user. You'll type DA, that's just a shortcut to move to the admin directory. And then you'll type a /server_admin_util, and then you'll see the Server Admin Utility menu. Let's actually go on to our training server here, and I'll just show you this live. So I've logged on to the training server, and I'm just going to use the shortcut. And this will show me then the menu for the Server Admin Utility. And you'll see lots of different options here, and I will go through these options. Keep in mind that you may not be using all of these options all of the time, but I would like to review it at just a high level so you get an idea of what's available here. For direct customers, it's good to have an understanding of these options, but Ex Libris will set up many of these on your behalf, so you won't necessarily need to make any updates to them. So let's go back to the slides. So we are going to take a high-level look at each of the options that you see here in the menu. The first option is Stop and Start Services. So we would click or type in number 1 here, and then we see a sub-menu that will display. So this is where you can stop and start MySQL and Apache. And you'll notice that there are options to start, stop, and also restart. Now, in many cases, you'll want to use the start and stop command rather than restart. So like when you make changes to reverse proxy configurations or changes to any core SFX programs. And that's because the restart command restarts the main process only. If there are child processes running, they may not be restarted using that restart command. You can also use the restart command, though, after cleaning the Apache logs. To use options 1 through 5, so options 1 through 5 that we see here in the submenu, and also options 9 through 11, you'll need to be logged in as the global user. And then for options 9 through 11 also, you'll need to have the Unix passwords for each of the SFX instance users. The second utility here, number 2, is File System Maintenance. So I would type in from the menu number 2, and I will see this submenu that displays. And this allows you to do maintenance tasks such as cleaning logs. You can also check for broken symbolic links, and actually that's using number 7 here. So this might be helpful if you have broken some symbolic links, but you're not really sure what files you have broken those links for. This will give you a list of them. You can also use this to schedule maintenance tasks. And again, if you're a direct customer, Ex Libris will schedule these tasks for you. The next option is for changing passwords. And this option allows you to change passwords for Unix and MySQL and also encrypt them for use in the configuration files. Option number 4 is for database maintenance. And so you can see here that you can check, repair, and analyze the MySQL tables. You can also, using options 7, 8, 9, and 10, export, import, and then drop or create indices. And do contact Ex Libris for help, Ex Libris support for help if you are using those options. Options 12 and 13, those are used by Ex Libris support only. And if you decide to use number 14 to clean your local instance database information, use that with caution because you're not able to undo it. The next option in the menu is for statistics. So here you would type in 5, and then this submenu will display. So in order to run statistics queries in the SFX Admin Center, the data itself, the statistical data itself, needs to be moved from an offline table to, it needs to be moved rather from an online table to an offline table. And so this is what the first option is for, move data from online to offline. So it's just a moving of data from one table to another table. Once it's moved to the offline table, then you'll be able to see those statistics in the SFX Admin Center when you run statistical queries. Now you can imagine that at some point you're going to have a lot of data stored in the offline table, and that's where number 2 comes into play. So by archiving the statistics, you can move them to a different server to store them indefinitely. Before you archive, though, you're just going to want to make sure that you've run all of the statistics queries that you're going to need for that time period. It's possible to load an archived statistics file back into the offline tables, and that's done with number 3. So you can then again run statistics for that archived data. So it's loading statistics from a file. You can check to see how big the stats tables get by using option number 4, show stats tables monitor information. And you can use that information to determine if or when you need to archive. Now, this is what it looks like. And in general, if the offline table reaches 1 million rows, we recommend that you archive it at that point. It's just a general guideline. Each row that you see in the table in the row count, so we'll see in this example, the row count for the offline table is 145,013 rows. Each row in that offline table represents one SFX request. In other words, one open URL that results in the loading of the SFX menu or direct link. And with number 5, back here in our submenu here, you can schedule these tasks, these maintenance tasks that are needed for statistics. If you're a direct customer, XLabris will schedule this for you. Number 6, the SFX request table, or rather clearing the SFX request table. The SFX request table stores the data that's used to generate each SFX menu screen, which means that it's going to need to be cleared out periodically. So that's what number 6 is for, to clear out that table. And this can also be scheduled as well. Also, let's see, if you've purchased, and here's the number 2, bullet point number 2, you need to clear out the SFX request table on a regular basis. And if you've purchased BX, you may be interested in the next 3 options, and that would be BX registration and configuration, publish historical stats for BX, or clean the OAI repository table. There's more information about those BX options in the BX SFX configuration guide. And just for those of you who are unfamiliar with BX, BX is a recommender service that helps users to discover relevant literature that they may not have found otherwise. So it provides usage-based recommendations, similar to user recommendations like at Amazon.com or other websites. Items number 10 and 11 have to do with previous fixes. So remove SFX requests, number 10 here. This was a fix we implemented in a previous service pack that takes care of an issue with Internet Explorer version 8 that affected SFX usage statistics. If you're running SFX version 4.0.3, or if you're in implementation with a new installation, this is already taken care of. If not, you can run this option. And then there's also a fix statistics file option to make it OS independent. And again, these were previous fixes that were needed. You can also run a series of diagnostics on SFX. So you do that from the SFX server admin utility from the main menu, number 6, diagnostics. So using the diagnostics, you can check to make sure that email is functioning properly. There's actually an email module that's used for the knowledge-based change requests area in the SFX Admin Center. Let me actually show you that at this point. If I go back to my SFX menu, I'm going to click on the home screen. Under troubleshooting, there's the link for knowledge-based change requests. That's actually, there's an email component to that. So when you fill out the form, it's emailed to our knowledge-based team. So there's an email component there. And then let me go back to the slides for a moment. For any local document delivery or feedback targets that you've created, there may be an email component for that as well. So using diagnostics, you can just make sure or check to make sure that email is working correctly. Same thing for FTP. You can check if FTP is working properly. And FTP is used with the MARKET program and also exporting electronic journals using the external export program, and this will be in the case of MetaLib. Check IP address. That diagnostic is used when you're installing SFX, so you probably won't need to deal with this much after the installation happens. And if you're using the external export, you can troubleshoot problems using number 4, and you can use number 5 here to check to see if the 39.50 has access to a particular OPAC. So just some diagnostics here. A to Z tools, and actually A to Z index, and this is number 7 in the server admin utility. These are important if, or this index rather, is important if you want to use the A to Z list. And we mentioned in the configuration, user interface configuration session, particularly for the A to Z list, that you need to get onto the server to run this indexing job, this A to Z index job. Well, here it is. The A to Z indexing job keeps everything in sync. So for example, if you have activated or deactivated targets, services, or object portfolios, this A to Z indexing job will make sure that those changes are reflected in your A to Z list. So from this menu, when you type in number 7 here, you will see a submenu that will appear. It's possible to build or rebuild the list, in other words, the A to Z list, using the A to Z index, and you can also schedule it as well. And you can also see what you have scheduled at what time it is scheduled to run. In general, you will want to run this on a daily or weekly basis, but it really depends on how often you're making changes to your resources in SFX. And if you're a direct customer, Libris will take care of scheduling this job for you. I'll mention this again in a few slides, but the A to Z list uses the information in the RSI job. RSI stands for Rapid Service Indicator, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But just a note that you'll need to run the RSI index before the A to Z index. So just this last bullet point here. The nice part about it is you can actually schedule both jobs, the A to Z index and the RSI index, through option number 7 here. So when you click on or type option number 1, for instance, for the eJournal A to Z list, it will give you the option at that point to schedule the RSI job at the same time. Note also that there are separate A to Z indexing jobs, one for eJournals and one for eBooks. And for eBooks, our recommendation is after the initial build that you do incremental builds for eBooks. So again, just a couple of things to know with the A to Z index. There are 2 different indexing jobs it needs to run, one for eJournals, one for eBooks. And also just a note again that the RSI, Rapid Service Indicator job, needs to run before the A to Z index job. The Google Holdings file export, that's actually number 8 in the server admin utility. This file export can be run and scheduled from here, from the server admin utility. And this export is also used in Primo for the Primo Central database. So this option here, number 8, used with Google Scholar, and it's also used with Primo Central. It's the same export file that's being used. This will create your full text holdings file and export it from SFX so that Google Scholar and or Primo Central, if that's applicable to your institution, can pick up that file on a weekly basis. The revision table update, this is number 9 in the SFX server admin utility. This option allows you to monitor and clean up the report tables, allows you to back up revisions and then roll them back as well. So this is what the revision update will do. During an update, everything that's going to be affected is backed up. So this allows you to go ahead and roll back the update if you need to. The Primo export, this is option number 10 in the server admin utility. This allows you to export a Primo file and then also schedule that export and update and remove scheduled exports. So you can actually see Like for instance, number 2 here shows scheduled Primo export file. So this will show you at what time it's scheduled to run. This process will create an XML export with active full text journals and books for import into Primo. So that's what this particular export does. The first time you run it, a full file is created. So all of your active full text journals and or ebooks will be put into this full file. If an export was already run and there's an output file in the directory, then an incremental export file is created. Incremental meaning it's just capturing any changes that you've made to your knowledge base and gathering them together in the file. The export itself is set up in the SFX admin interface, and then instructions are available in the Systems Administration Guide. I had mentioned the RSI, or Rapid Service Indicator, number 11 here actually, and this is used to determine full text availability in SFX. MetaLib uses it, Primo uses it, and most importantly, your A to Z list uses it. So it determines full text availability. And this can be scheduled to run. Remember that when you schedule this to run, make sure you schedule this job, the RSI job, before your A to Z indexing job runs. And this is so that your A to Z list will be up to date. And again, if you're a direct customer, Ex Libris takes care of scheduling this for you. In terms of scheduling though, you can schedule it from here, option number 11, or you can actually use option number 7 here, the A to Z index, and that will allow you to schedule not only the A to Z index job, but also the RSI index job as well. Along with the maintenance tasks that we just covered, there's a knowledge base or a KB update that happens on a weekly basis. SFX KB updates or revisions, sometimes you may hear that term, consist of software updates as well as database updates. So these can be anything from a configuration file change to new and updated targets, sources, services, objects, and so on. The updates are applied to the global instance and can be applied to your local instance through the use of symbolic links. Or in the case of where a symbolic link is broken, you can determine how you want to implement those changes in your local instance. SFX updates are run on the server, and the updates are released weekly, every Tuesday. And if you're a direct customer, Ex Libris will run the weekly updates for you. If you're a local customer where you host SFX on your own server, it's up to your individual library as to when to run the updates. You don't have to run them right away. So if you have your own maintenance window, you can run them at that point. The process takes typically about a half hour, and there's no real downtime, though you may want to run it during off-peak hours just to make sure it doesn't slow your users down. Updates are cumulative, so if it makes more sense to run it less often at your institution, that is possible. It's possible that to set this up as a recurring job to apply these updates automatically. And again, for direct customers, Ex Libris will run the KB updates for you, so there's no need to worry about that when those updates are going to happen. For all customers, however, when the weekly updates are applied, you'll want to review the release notes to see if they included any newly added resources that you want to activate. So maybe there are new targets or target services or object portfolios that were added, or to see if any resources were removed or deleted, and you may want to know about that. So it is important to look at the release notes. We'll talk more about the release notes in just a moment. Occasionally, there will be service packs that local customers may need to apply. These are not issued on a regular basis anymore since most of the changes with SFX are being handled in the weekly revision updates. But just keep in mind, once in a while, you may see a service pack that does need to be applied manually. As just mentioned, for all SFX customers, it's important to review the release notes for each weekly update to see if there are any targets or services or objects that were maybe added or removed. If targets, services, or objects were added and you subscribe to them, you may want to activate them then in your knowledge base. If any resources were removed, no action is needed on your part. You may just want to be aware that they were removed from the knowledge base. Now, weekly release notes can be accessed in a couple of different ways. First of all, from the Ex Libris Documentation Center. And the URL is listed here to our Customer Center. From there, you would click on the Documentation Center. And within Documentation Center, here's the path to find the release notes. The Documentation Center will have a PDF version and an Excel version of the weekly report. From the Admin Center, the SFX Admin Center, in the KB Updates section, that's another way to get the release notes. And you can actually get an HTML report of the changes that happened in the release or text reports as well. And actually, let me just show you this now. Let's go back over to our SFX Admin Center. And in the section under Setup and Administration, KB Update, and here we'll see HTML reports and text reports. So at this point, I'll just look at the HTML reports, but just know that you can get a text report as well. So HTML reports. I can select which weekly revision I want to get information on. So I'll just select the one at the top. That's the most recent one. And notice it says started on, and this will tell you when the release was applied. So it's date. This is a date format, time and date format. So we have the year listed first, the month, and then the year, and then the time it was applied. So this is the most recent update. I can see or limit it to a type of change. Do I want to see any new things that were added during the update? Do I just want to see anything that was updated, or do I want to see any, for instance, targets or objects or services that were deleted in the update? So in this case, I'll check for any new updates. I can filter to just show any updates to local things that I have activated, or any targets that I have active in my knowledge base. So I can filter to that. In this case, I'm going to say no, I'm just looking for new objects. But in the case of something updated, I may want to filter just to anything that any changes, any updates to active things that I have in my knowledge base. So I could say updated yes. In this case, though, we are looking just for new objects, and so I'm not going to filter to anything that I have active at this point. And I'm going to change that to no. And then I can see what would I like to have information on that was newly added. So I can look for new targets, target services, sources, and source services. I can look for any new linking parameters that are needed. And same thing with any object portfolios with a select target service. So in this case, I'm going to look for any new targets, target services, sources, and source services that were added during this weekly update. The output type, I can have it emailed to me, or I can see the changes on the screen. So I'm actually going to select screen and click on submit. If I expand, notice I have a target section and a target service section. I'm going to go ahead and expand the target section. And these are all of the new targets that were added during this weekly release. So if I subscribed to one of these targets, a very easy way to activate them is by clicking on this KB button. And so if I subscribe to Emerald Engineering back files and I notice that it's a new target that's been added, I want to activate that right away. So I can click on KB on this little button, and that will actually take me to the target level in just a moment. And it's taking SFX just a second here. Let's try that again just to make sure. Here we go. My training server is just a little bit slow. And so then this will take me to the particular target, and in this case I need to open it up or expand it, and then I can activate the target level from here, drill down to the service level, activate that, and then drill down to the portfolio level to activate that. So just a quick way to get to the target to activate it. Let's go back to the slides at this point. Just a note also that Ex Libris will typically send a message to the SFXL listserv indicating that a weekly update is available. So this could be helpful just as a reminder for you to review the release notes. Now for more information on subscribing to the SFX listserv, you can see the URL that's listed here. Let's talk about recommended maintenance next. We've covered a lot of information that you may or may not need to use on a regular basis, so we've actually put together a recommended maintenance list so that you can keep SFX happy and healthy. This checklist doesn't replace all of the information I've given you, but it pretty much covers what you need to know in terms of maintenance tasks that need to be performed. This list is actually taken from the System Administration Guide, and there's more detail there on what each task or job does and how each is set up. And you'll want to check back to the System Administration Guide for any updates to this list. In the last column, if you are a direct customer where your SFX server is actually an Ex Libris server, this will tell you if it's something that we're doing for you or if it's something that you need to set up for yourselves. And note that many of these jobs will actually be scheduled by Ex Libris during your implementation, so you won't need to schedule them on your own. You'll want to check with your Ex Libris implementation team for more information on scheduled jobs. And just a reminder again to check back to the System Administration Guide for any updates to this list. At that point, this brings us to the end of our session. So in brief, we covered how SFX is structured on the server side and how backup and recovery works. We looked at how to use the log files and the debug tool in particular to troubleshoot and debug issues. We looked at how to use the server admin utility to perform maintenance tasks, run indices, and so on. And just in general, we looked at what you need to do to keep SFX happy and healthy and up to date in terms of running weekly knowledge base updates and recommended maintenance tasks. More information on SFX System Administration is available in the Ex Libris Documentation Center. The Systems Administration Guide will be of most help for systems administration topics, but the other documents listed here may be helpful as well. Thanks for joining me.